implementing strategic marketing and communications programs that increase the visibility and effectiveness of the North American Marine Environmental Protection Association, as well as the development of educational resources promoting marine environmental protection. She works to develop strategic alliances between industry, regulators, and environmental groups to save the seas. In 2015, she was appointed an ambassador by the International Maritime Organization. Ms. Kluss.
Good morning, and thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for being here. The reason we're all here is to improve our oceans, improve our environment, and also balance commerce, research, and our military functions. We're building a greater society, and you're very much a part of that, so I thank you for being here. I want to talk a little bit from the commercial shipping side, and I want to communicate, hopefully by the end of this discussion, not just the importance of shipping in our daily lives, but also some of the actions that the maritime industry is taking in order to make sure they're good stewards of our planet. There seems to be a perception that once ships go over the horizon, it's like cowboys at sea, and that is absolutely not true. We operate under an extremely rigorous regulatory framework, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that today. But I want to give you a sense of shipping size. There are over 50,000 merchant ships trading internationally, transporting every kind of cargo. The world's fleet is registered in over 150 nations and manned by over 1 million seafarers, virtually every nation. But our role in global trade is something that I think is important for all of us here to understand. I often say that shipping may be the second oldest business, but it's the first global business. Some people disagree, but we won't go there. Just to give you a sense of our growth, in 2008, it was estimated that the industry transported a total volume of world trade of 32,000 billion ton miles. Think about tons and miles, just around and around and around, and nearly 50,000 billion ton miles in 2014. Think about that in terms of growth, and it's expected to continue that growth. Shipping is regulated by the International Maritime Organization. That is a UN agency that is headquartered in London and creates the global regulations under which we operate. Now, there's one thing to establish regulations, but a greater component of that is enforcement. And there are a couple of levels of enforcement for those regulations. The principal responsibility for those regulations and enforcing them, which concerns ship safety as well as environmental protection, rest with what we call flag states. So many of you have heard Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, Bahamas. When you look at the stern of a ship, you also see Delaware a lot of times too. U.S. is a flag state. It is also a port state control, because that's the second level of enforcement. But flag states enforce the IMO regulations, whether it's environmental or safety, conducted by their international surveyors, and many of them use classification societies to do that regulation and inspection. But then we have the next level, which is port state control. And port state control enforcement is where officials in any country can go on board vessels to ensure that they are complying with the regulations that have been established and make sure that they're conforming to those regulations. So in essence, IMO regulations are enforced on a global basis. In the United States, our United States Coast Guard is responsible for port state control. So, as I said, in the United States, we're both a flag state, and I think we'll be hearing from Michael Carter in the Maritime Administration a little bit more about U.S. as a flag state, but we're also responsible for port state control, and I would submit we have one of the most rigorous regimes in the world. So what are some of the IMO regulations that pertain to the environment? These are called MARPOL, or Marine Pollution Regulations, and they are the main conventions under which prevent pollution from ships. Currently, they also include annexes. So we've got MARPOL Annex 1 through MARPOL Annex 6. And just a refresher for most of you, but just maybe it's new information for some, is that the MARPOLs range from oil to air. MARPOL Annex 1 is the regulation for the prevention of pollution by oil. So when you hear oily water separator, for instance, anytime oil gets near the water, that's MARPOL Annex 1. MARPOL Annex 2 is the regulation, the control of pollution by noxious liquid substances in bulk. 3 is harmful substances carried by sea in packaged form. So regulations pertaining to how materials are carried. 4 is the prevention from sewage from ships. 5 is the prevention of garbage from ships. There was, I think it was a year ago, January, the annex got even stricter for 5, so that I think you can throw overboard macerated banana peels, but that's just about it. And MARPOL Annex 6 is prevention by air pollution from ships. And that's something, that's one of the primary areas where ports and ships intersect, because that's something of importance to port communities when ships come in. But I want to also help everyone understand that shipping is one of the most environmentally efficient modes of transportation. It's the most environmentally benign mode of transportation when you look at the volume of goods carried. When you look at the different modes, you can see that on the low end are the in terms of CO2 from ships, you've got the very large container ships. You've got the oil tankers, you've got bulk carriers and ferries, compared to what the airlines contribute and trucks. We also are a relatively minor player when it comes to different industries, contributing 2.8% of CO2 emissions, and considering the volume of goods that we carry, that is a relatively small percentage. That's not to say we're not looking at improvement, but it certainly is a relatively small contributor of CO2. But our industry is working towards reducing even that. From 2007 to 2012, there was a 10% reduction in total CO2 emissions by the industry. And our objective is carbon neutral growth. We're one of the first in global industries to have mandatory CO2 rules in effect globally. And we're working towards there's 20% less CO2 per ton kilometer than in 2005. So improvements are being made. The goal is 50% CO2 reduction by 2050 as an industry. And you can see on this chart that this is the movement of IMO action on carbon. So you'll see that there is an increasing emphasis on the reduction of carbon by ships, as well as by SOx. We've created something called emission control areas. And for instance, the United States and all of North America is considered an ECA, an emission control area. So within 200 miles of the United States and Canada, you have to be using low sulfur fuel. Some of the strategies for reducing emissions by the shipping industry include that use of low sulfur fuels. You're going to be hearing tomorrow from the representative from Carnival about the use of scrubber technology. We're also looking into LNG shipping, LNG as a fuel source for ships. TOTE has done construction as well as working towards repowering of ships to use LNG as fuel. Obviously, one of the challenges is bunkering of LNG, and that's being looked at now. In Jacksonville, for instance, for TOTE, they've created an LNG bunkering facility, and when they implement it up in Tacoma, there's an LNG facility planned for that as well. And also, the industry uses cold ironing. I'm not always a fan of cold ironing. I think you also have to look at the power source, but it is an effective use of reducing emissions, particularly when you're talking about energy that's derived from hydropower. Also on board, we're looking at technologies for, as the Admiral said, in terms of turning waste into energy on board vessels. This is the MAG system, the micro auto gasification system. And another strategy is reducing the drag of the hull by introducing bubbles on the hull of the ship. With ports, and I know Massport has been looking at initiatives such as this, they've been doing a lot with taking trucks and repowering trucks in order to to reduce the emissions of trucks, and there are rules applying to that. New York has their new truck program, and Seattle now has their scrapping program for older trucks. And also cargo handling. There's a great deal of use of electric forklifts and hybrid hostlers. One of the things I do want to get back to in terms of looking at what shipping is doing is looking at the reduction in incidents that have occurred for the spillage of oil into the sea. And you'll see that there's been a huge reduction since the 1970s to the present day. A lot of that has to do with the regulations that were imposed with OPA 90, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which was a direct result of the Exxon Valdez spill. And that mandated double hulls. It also mandated increased training requirements and increased operational requirements, so that you can see there is an extreme reduction in the number of incidents that occur. But I want to talk a little bit too, not just about environmental protection in terms of regulations, but also regulations pertaining to the human element. Because as we know, the human element is the principal cause of incidents and accidents in all technology and industries. And it's important to understand the interaction between humans and technology, and look at how human behavior and human actions need to be addressed in terms of risk mitigation. And reduction of risk through regulation is a key opportunity for that. To that end, there are numerous IMO regulations related to safety at sea. The first one I want to just briefly touch on is SOLAS, which is Safety of Life at Sea, which talks about ship safety standards. And the first version of SOLAS was a direct outcome from the Titanic back in 1914. The treaty was never ratified because of World War I. But SOLAS, the focus on ship safety, began with the Titanic and continues today. Today, the treaty, the convention itself, has 159 contracting states, which flag 99% of the world's tonnage. The next area that I wanted to just bring forward to your attention is the STCW, which is the Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping, which are the requirements that seafarers have to undergo to make sure that they are at the top of their game in terms of the training they've received, the hours of watchkeeping that they stand, and just to make sure that the seafarers on board the ships are operating at the highest level. By 2014, 98.8% of the world's shipping tonnage had signed on to this treaty. And finally, there's the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006, and that addresses the well-being of seafarers. And that has to do with their rest periods, but also their accommodations on board the vessels. So one of the things that has been an element that of the maritime industry and a criticism of the industry is that until about the last 20-25 years, the industry has tried to keep its cards very close to the vest. But with the introduction of publicly traded shipping companies as well as the internet, the maritime industry's visibility has increased, and so must its voice. And one of the voices of the maritime industry today is NMEPA, the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. What our mission is to preserve and protect the marine environment, as well as demonstrate the maritime industry's commitment to environmental protection and support the marine industry in its efforts to reduce its impact on the marine environment. We bring together industry and regulators and environmental groups and educators to talk about strategies for protecting the marine environment, as well as educating the public about the value proposition of the maritime industry. Our members come from North America, Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean, as well as companies that trade to the United States and Europe. And we host and produce events. We have 3 major events, one in Houston, one in Washington, one in New York, and then we host regional events around North America. Our next event is May 23rd, National Maritime Day, down in Washington, D.C., and we'll be following our Safety at Sea seminar with the AMVER Awards. AMVER is a Coast Guard program which recognizes industry members that will commit to divert in the event of a need for rescue at sea. We also work with shipping and offshore corporations on their corporate social responsibility. We educate seafarers. We augment the training that they receive on board. We educate them about marine debris. We educate them about the marine MARPOLs. And through our relationship with the North American Maritime Ministry Association, we've distributed 12,000 copies of the American Club's environmental crimes poster. We've also developed a MARPOL training, a marine science seafarer training program. And we work through with port communities, distributing over 200,000 copies of our marine debris poster, which talks about the decomposition of marine debris in the oceans. And we host events with regional orientation suited to the local industry's needs and interests. We work with students. We've developed we have one educator's guide to the marine debris, educator's guide to the marine environment, and right now we're working on our educator's guide to the marine industry. And this is K-12 STEM and GNSS training guides for educators so they can work with students on this. We also partner with the Coast Guard, the OAS, and also Sea Research Foundation to reach 2.5 million students on our drawing contest. This year's was Discovering the Marine Industry. And we're co-sponsors of a marine science fair. We work with Boys and Girls Clubs, after-school programs, Mystic Aquarium. We work with the Sea Life Center in Alaska. And we participate in Ocean Conservancy's annual International Coastal Cleanup, as well as their Marina Day. We continue to develop programs, and we distribute these programs throughout North America. And we have a NMEPA Junior website, including Morgan the Manatee. So some of our partnerships include our MOU with the Coast Guard, our MOU with NOAA. We have an MOU with the International Maritime Organization, Intertanko, ITOF, Ocean Conservancy, Power Squadron, and more. One of the partnerships that we really value so much is with the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary, who, with their 30,000 volunteers, have been distributing our materials to the public. With the Power Squadron and the Coast Guard Auxiliary, we're able to reach the recreational boater. So we continue to build our alliances. We continue to work with chapters, building chapters around North America. And our goal is to get our materials into the field. So if you have an organization that would like to use our materials and distribute our materials, please talk to me, because that's our goal, is to get out into the field. So advocate, educate, and activate. Thank you very much for your time.